Welcome back to the Injury Prone Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm here to Edwin Porras, fantasypoints.com. Gracias por tus oídos. Listeners, you have three options. Option number one, go to Underdog Fantasy, use promo code Injury Prone. You're going to get up to $1,000 matched by Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code Injury Prone. That's option number one. Option number two, subscribe to the Injury Prone podcast on YouTube. Subscribe to them on is it still called iTunes podcast, whatever app you're in. Subscribe there, go to YouTube, subscribe there, wherever you want. Option number three, go to the show notes, find the Injury Prone Draft Guide and Playbook. You're going to find everything you need to know how to manage your fantasy team. You're also going to get, out of courtesy, you're going to get the draft guide from this year. You can get an idea of what it looks like. Make sure you check the show notes there. You're going to know exactly how much time to miss, how much a wide receiver will miss with a high ankle sprain, how much a running back will miss with a hamstring strain, how much a quarterback will miss with an ankle injury, all that stuff, what they look like when they come back. Everything to manage your team, literally everything you need to know in one spot. You have three options, right? Underdog Fantasy, Injury Prone, subscribe to the podcast, go to the show notes, take a look at the Injury Prone Draft Guide and Playbook. So it's been a week. We've had a lot of injuries obviously pile up, as we usually do. Are injuries worse than they ever have been? Probably not. We can go back and look at the data eventually, but generally speaking, by the time we get to week 2, week 3, everybody starts to say these are the worst amount of injuries we've ever seen. Remember, the NFL has a 98% injury rate. And I think this actually, Jorge, we're going to get into this a little bit. We're going to talk about injuries. For those of you who are new, because I know there are a lot of you that are, a lot of you haven't purchased a draft guide, and that's okay. I don't expect you to consume everything that I put out. Injury Prone is a lie is in my bio on Twitter, on X, whatever you want to call it. Here's why. This is a statistical fact that is not that it is inarguable. There are plenty of data out there that shows this and supports this. One major study found there is a 98% injury rate in NFL games. 98%. So once you account for the injuries that guys don't report, it's basically virtually 100% injury rate. Guys get injured. Ankles, shoulders, chest, ribs, hand, elbow, forearm, concussions, hamstring, everything that you could under the sun imagine. Injuries happen 98% of the time in an NFL game. When it comes to sports med in general, any good sports medicine provider will tell you most injuries, even the ones that we think we have a little bit of control over, like hamstring strains, potentially ACLs, we have a little bit of influence what we do from a training perspective, from a prehab perspective. Even though we have a little control over those, we mainly have no control in a chaotic collision sport like football. Anybody on the internet, anybody, including me, call me out if I ever do this, if I ever tell you that I predicted a guy was going to get a shoulder sprain, that he was going to have an AC joint dislocation, that he was going to break his ankle, if I ever predicted that a guy or claimed to predict that a guy with no history was going to have a concussion, for example, I would be lying to you. The NFL is unpredictable. Injuries are largely unpredictable. That is why injury analysts are constantly in the weeds trying to figure out exactly what the data looks like, what it says. So if you ever come across an injury analyst or any person who thinks that you can say injury prone to this, injury prone to that, predicting a player with no history in the NFL is going to have an injury is like saying if you walk out in the rain, you're going to get wet. Okay? That's the bottom line. If they have a hamstring injury history, that's one thing. A calf, maybe, right, soft tissue type stuff. If they've had one ACL, they're more likely statistically to have another ACL. If they have one Achilles, et cetera, et cetera. If they have one concussion, right? Injury history is king. I say that constantly. But don't ever let anybody fool you into thinking that they can predict what's going to happen from an injury perspective. And I'll leave it at that. Have a happy Saturday. Let's talk about Jordan Love. Is Jordan Love going to come back this week? Well, it's certainly possible, right? My initial projection for him was either week 4 or 5. I do think week 4 is still on the table. If he comes back, he will be highly limited, significantly limited in mobility, and he will also be at a higher risk of re-injury. The Packers tend to be pretty conservative, even though this is something that he's already been practicing on. By all reports, they say essentially that it's one of those things that where they were very tepid in saying that he was back at practice, and he was moving a little bit, but I don't think he's quite ready. If he is, he's going to be significantly limited. I probably wouldn't play Jordan Love himself, but it does raise guys. Probably, it does raise Josh Jacobs' status a little bit. It probably raises Jaden Reed's status a little bit. But Jordan Love will be limited if he plays this week. I want to talk about another quarterback that isn't on the list initially, but I do want to mention it. It's Justin Herbert, who apparently told reporters that he sustained a high ankle sprain. These high ankle sprains for quarterbacks, they don't limit them as much as you'd think necessarily from a fantasy perspective. But his mobility, which is already limited, right? He doesn't necessarily run a ton. He can run like a gazelle. He just doesn't do it. But these guys' mobility after a high ankle sprain does seem to be limited. And so if you look at a sample of quarterbacks from 2018 through 2023, and again, this is sort of combined because the samples are too small. I combined all ankle sprains, all foot sprains, everything into one. If you look at these guys who have these quarterbacks, what you look at is that the week winner rate. So in other words, and this is all in the injury prone draft guide and playbook, the week winner rate. So if they score 150+% of their pre-injury production, that does take a decent hit, but they can still provide you with a little bit of a floor. Just don't expect, and I don't think we expected this from Justin Herbert anyway, but don't expect them to win you your week. He's not probably going to put up huge numbers this week. Even though I do think that he's going to try to play because Justin Herbert tries to play through everything. Moving on here to T. Higgins. We'll start there with T. Higgins specifically and then work down our way down to the tight ends. It looks like he's going to play. Typically, these wide receiver hamstring injuries don't result in as much time that he's missed already. So, he is already a little bit of an outlier since most of these wide receivers come back after one game, maximum 2 games. But if he does play, he's already at high risk. He's shown that he can't, I don't want to say can't, but he's shown that even if this isn't necessarily a franchise tag related injury, which I'm a little skeptical that, that it isn't, he's shown that this is still something that's sticking around with him. So in his first week back, week 3, hasn't been able to stay on the field. I don't think T. Higgins is a must start. Understand that he's got a really high floor, a really high ceiling, but the floor is bottom of the barrel here. And that's typically how wide receivers perform after a hamstring strain anyway. They are boom or bust. They either re-injure and do nothing, or they can have 1 or 2 big plays, which we know T. Higgins is capable of doing. But I'm avoiding him in cash games. I'm avoiding him anywhere that really matters where I need guaranteed points. If you need to throw him in your lineup, I know we have a lot of injuries that have come up. I understand. I probably have to play him in a league that I don't necessarily want to, where I have Debo and a couple other injuries. You can throw him in your lineup. Just understand that there's pretty high risk with him here in this first week. Keenan Allen has been dealing with this heel thing, and I don't have it's either a bruised heel, but it's chronic at this point, or he does have some legitimate, plantar fasciitis or something like that going on. This is chronic. It's not going away. He missed a ton of time at the end of last year because of this heel issue, and I don't necessarily anticipate this going away. So, Keenan Allen can come back and maybe provide somewhat of a floor, but I do think that because of that heel injury, he's just not really a guy that I'm targeting. And I think that as the season goes on, he'll fade a little bit more. And I think Rome Odunze will start to flash a little more. We saw Marvin Harrison flash. We saw Malik Neighbors flash. I'm hoping, and we saw Brian Thomas flash. I'm hoping the next in line, and I'm praying, honestly, that we're going to see Rome Odunze flash a little bit here in the next coming weeks without Keenan Allen. So these tight ends, right? These injuries for the Niners keep piling up, and there's something going on. The Woj fingers. What is going on in San Francisco? I talked to my buddy, Dr. Jeff Mueller at PT, and he mentioned that they actually have a new head of sports med over there of performance. Maybe the changes in the workloads is something that's going on there. We don't know, but now they have Debo out. They have Kittle out. They have McCaffrey out. This is not an offense that I'm necessarily targeting. In theory, Brandon Ayuk should eat here, but also now defenses have much less to worry about. They can just take away anything over the top for Ayuk. So I don't know how this is going to roll out. This is probably a big Jordan Mason game, but Kittle is out this week. And because it was a mid-week injury, at the very least, I wouldn't prepare to be with Kittle next week either, especially with the Niners ailing the way they are. They probably want to get these guys right before they, want to hit that second gear in November, December, like we know the Niners usually do. Evan Engram, you could copy and paste that exact same analysis aside from being on the Jaguars, which is obviously very different culture. Evan Ingram's probably going to be out this week, and I do think that he has a chance to come back next week. So based on averages, you wouldn't expect him to miss more than 1 or 2 weeks. If he doesn't make progress by the middle of next week, there could be something that happens. You could see a roster move, an IR move. But if he continues to progress like we assume that he is, then I think that he's got a chance to play in week 4, if not week 5. Other than that, I think that we're covered for most of these injuries. Make sure you go to fantasypoints.com where I have my full injury report written there. You can check that out where I have the full detailed breakdown analysis on every guy with projected timelines and returns and advice on whether you should target them or not target them. So other than that, have a happy Saturday. Gracias por tus oídos.